Hello, my name is Lewis and welcome to Deep Dive, where today we'll be looking at Park Chan Wook's No Other Choice. Park Chan Wook is arguably the most well-regarded South Korean filmmaker, only next to maybe Bong Joon-ho. But what Park has done over the course of his career is establish a very, very loud and salient cinematic language. It's a language that's so easy to recognize because of how direct and confrontational it is. It's always clean and precise and incredibly violent. And when we see a film like No Other Choice, you immediately recognize it as a Park Chan Wook film. No Other Choice stars Lee Byung-hun, who you may recognize from I Saw the Devil, another staple of South Korean cinema, and he plays a paper manufacturer. His job is nothing miraculous, but it served to help his family reach a level of affluence in their life that has made them very, very comfortable. And we see this within the opening scene of the film, which is very, very Park Chan Wook style, and it throws you into the film immediately of what kind of tone this film is going to be. The opening scene is Lee Byung-hun with his family in this idyllic setting where he is hosting a barbecue and cooking eel that his company have given him. He's able to serve it to all his family who are present. They have two identical dogs. There are sakura blossoms falling from the sky. Mozart is playing in the background. And it's just this incredibly overly romanticized and dramatic manner of which Park Chan Wook proceeds to present all of his films. Park is a director of melodrama. What he does is he will take an emotion, he will take a scenario and extrapolate it to its most extreme edges. So for instance, as this film opens, it's not just that the family is comfortable and that they're happy, it's that this happiness transcends human happiness. It's too perfect a scenario. And yet the film treats all of this melodrama with the degree of respect that we are supposed to take it all seriously. And throughout the film there's never a point in which the melodrama of this film feels as though it crosses a certain boundary. There are extremities and absurdities in this film that all seem to coalesce with one another. It becomes a very enjoyable experience to see a film that's willing to just go along with the aesthetic vision that it sets up for itself. But with all that in mind, No Other Choice is one of the more grounded films of Park's filmography. There is that strong presence of violence that we would see in something like his Vengeance trilogy, and everything is performed with this operatic nature. However, where the drama in the film ultimately lies is a kind of drama that the layman can relate to. It's not like Oldboy, in which your protagonist is someone who's been kidnapped for 15 years and is then given a time limit to find his abductor. No Other Choice is about a man who has lost his job. The paper company that Lee Byung-hun works for is bought out by Americans, and as such, he's laid off. He tells his family that in 3 months they'll be back on their feet, and then we see over a year later, he's working menial retail jobs. He's essentially had a great injustice done to him, and the world seems to have no inkling that it's going to ease up on this suffering. He's capable and he's determined, but nothing's going right. As such, his family need to make accommodations for the lifestyle that they've become accustomed to. They can no longer have the tennis lessons. They can no longer have the barbecues. They can no longer do the hobbies that they want. And Lee Byung-hun's character simply can't abide this. Why should he, and his family for that matter, have to make these sacrifices for something that isn't their fault? Which brings us to the crux of the narrative drama of No Other Choice, wherein the decision that Lee Byung-hun makes is that he will post a fake advert for a job vacancy in the hopes that the people that apply for the job are the most capable people for the real life job, which they are all likely to apply to, Lee Byung-hun knowing that he might not be as good an employee as these others. And so he gives himself no other choice but to get rid of these people. Park Chan Wook's style is essentially a masterful take at being able to approach any kind of dark material. But the nature of his filmography is that whenever he approaches dark material, you never quite know what lens he will approach it with. Of course, there's always going to be that operatic sense. It's always going to be violent. It's always going to be hyperclinical. But what there also is are these very, very stark tonal shifts throughout his work. And No Other Choice might be the prime example of that. Because I can say that I probably haven't seen a film in the cinemas for a while that is this funny. No Other Choice, although a thriller and definitely a satire, more than anything else, It's a comedy, and a very, very funny one at that. There's the obvious absurdity of a man that's willing to go through something so complex to essentially get a job back at a factory. When you think of a film like Kind Hearts and Coronets, it deals with that same kind of comedy, that absurdist, dark, violent comedy. But you can more so understand the violent tendencies of a character like that because it's based around greed. And what he wants to do is wipe out his family dynasty so that he is next in line for the family fortune. But this isn't a story of greed. This is kind of a story of integrity. This is kind of a story of loyalty to one's family, that you will do anything to be able to provide for them. The irony of the film is that Lee Byung-hun is just trying to get a job at a factory. And he has told himself, that we hear constantly throughout the film, that there's no other choice. When the reality is, and it's very clear by the finale of the film, that there were a myriad of other choices. When we speak on South Korean cinema, we really have to acknowledge it as the staple of 21st century cinema that it has become. The stage of world cinema since the 2000s has been defined as South Korea being one of its strongest components. And of course, we can't speak about South Korean cinema as a comparison also without speaking about Parasite, which is arguably one of the most important films of the 21st century. Not even just in terms of the themes that it's talking about, but the idea of a film becoming a cultural and critical phenomenon. And one of the things that I always said about Parasite was that I found it interesting that the default perspective of Parasite was that it was a critique of capitalism, which it definitely was, but what I argued more so was that it was more of a critique of Korean culture. And of course, we see this in No Other Choice. It is also a critique of Korean culture, but I feel that that criticism emerges more as a byproduct, simply because the film happens to be set in South Korea, and so inevitably it will be saying many things about South Korea. We see that kind of overtly emotional obedience to a company. After Lee Byung-hun is let off from his job, he goes to these seminars and these workshops in which the people kind of go through this grieving therapy that they are actually a good person and that my family will support me. And ultimately, you can see the universalities in this. A lot of what occurs within No Other Choice also has very strong parallel to the work of Chuck Palahniuk. It's this very uncomfortable look at people that are unaware that they have been completely pulled into this world of materialism and a form of employment that has sucked any humanity out of them, that they ultimately can't think rationally, to the point that they think if you don't have a job working in a factory, then of course the logical thing to do is tell yourself you have no other choice but to get back in that factory, and you will do it by any means necessary. But returning to Parasite as a critique of South Korean culture rather than capitalism, I think that No Other Choice is the much stronger film in its critique of capitalism. I found that going through the film and watching it right up until the end, there's a slight ambiguity to what is the perspective that the film holds. Should we support this character? Is the nature of him doing something which is ultimately honourable, even if the actions that will achieve the desired result are dishonourable? Do we support him? Are we critiquing the system as a whole? Is the nature of wanting to be back in the world, almost forcing yourself back in the world, ultimately a dishonourable action? And throughout the film, this question is present, but by the very, very end, I think the film answers that. And you realise just how much of a critique, how much of a satire that this film has been all the way throughout. The ending credit sequence does not disguise what the perspective of the film is. It reaches a point of such absurdity that there's no room for the viewpoint of the film to hide. It shows itself as clear as day. And it's right by the end that the film really ties itself together and adds a lot more context to everything that you've seen. And I feel that although the film can be enjoyed from a much more surface level, that finale of the film taking a stand and ensuring exactly what the film is about makes it all the more stronger. No Other Choice is a strong indictment of the current system of capitalism, of this idea that the want and the need and the desire to not question the system that you're desperate to be a part of so that you can carry on living this incredibly materialistic life that you've become so accustomed to. And it returns us to that opening scene, because then when you have the context of this scenario, which was seemed so paradisic to our main character, you realize that although it's shown in this romantic, operatic manner, it's also very ridiculous. Ultimately, our main character found such joy in such superfluous things. His wife got new shoes. He was able to cook eel on a barbecue. Because what we also see of the main character is that he's very oblivious to everything else that's going on. Although he really does care for his family, it's to that certain level where he can provide for them monetarily, and yet he's so blissfully unaware of any of the needs and wants of every other member of his family. His son is out committing petty crime with his friends. His wife, he feels as though she's having an affair when she's not. But the most interesting relationship that he shares or doesn't share is that of his daughter, the assumed to be autistic child prodigy. Lee Byung-hun's daughter is almost nonverbal. However, she has this immense proficiency at playing the cello, to the point that one of the most arduous things that Lee Byung-hun has to give up are his daughter's cello lessons. Lessons which actually he needed to pay more for because of how good she is. But without spoiling the film, what Lee Byung-hun's daughter has is a sense of purity. Not only is she a child, she's a child that has a completely insular life, that she just cares about this one thing. She just repeats what other people say because that's how she communicates. And the thing that she has this immense passion for is playing the cello. She is not a materialistic person. She's the creative, artistic lens of the family. And by her not sharing this lens or even being aware of what her family are doing, the end of the film uses her as this strong anchor to suggest, of course you think there's no other choice, because if you are blinded by materialism, you would never think of alternatives, which this child does. And it's done in this very beautiful way that almost illuminates something for the family, but by that point, it's already too late. But I do have to commend the experience of watching No Other Choice, because as a film to sit in a theatre and watch, it is a very joyous experience. You are enthralled by this absurdist drama and find yourself supporting a character that's doing horrendous things. In 1 second, it will be immensely funny, and in the next, it will feel tragic and uncomfortable. But all of the emotions that are there, they are real. They're treated with respect, and you do feel them. A sequence in which Lee Byung-hun encounters a former employee that he worked with, who is now a shoe salesman. It feels so tragic and sad. And when you realize the decision that Lee Byung-hun has made, ultimately, yes, you do want him to be able to support and provide for his family and succeed, but you question at what cost. But the first employee that he encounters, whose storyline is so ridiculous, and yet that whole sequence is directed with absolute mastery. The scene in which there is a confrontation between Lee Byung-hun and the first victim of his plan, that scene alone is worth the price of admission, because that is one of the funniest, most chaotic scenes I've seen for a long time in cinema. There is no question watching this that it is a Park Chan Wook film, and although you're measuring it against the greats that he's had throughout his filmography, I don't think it is that high, but I'm talking about some of the films that I would consider the greatest of all time. The fact that it stands within his filmography should be a testament enough to how good the film is. It slots in so well in his filmography to the point that some of the violent acts that you have seen in his Vengeance trilogy, those exact same acts are also in this film. I completely forgot to mention as well, the film is based on a book written by Costa Gavras, who many of you may know from his film Z, or Z. And if you've seen that film, then you understand that this film at its foundation is a thriller. But when Park Chan Wook approaches it, it is his style. It's this over-the-top, hyper-emotional, every scene appears clinical and it's shot in deep focus so that you can see everything. The foundation itself is serious and the subject matter is treated seriously. But Park Chan Wook does what he always does. He has that kind of pictographic form of shooting a scene. For instance, there's a moment where Lee Byung-hun, he's shot in a close-up and he's playing with his daughter on the swing. And it's just him central to the frame and her feet either side of him with yellow boots that keep coming in and out. It looks like a scene from an animation, and he's always done this in his work, but it doesn't feel out of place. It feels very, very characteristic of him, and it does add this kind of character and quality to the film overall. That I am supposed to take all of this very seriously, but I can have fun with it at the same time. But then when I'm having fun with it, the film also will question, well, why are you having fun of this? This is a very serious matter. It's very playful and tongue-in-cheek, and neither of those approaches diminish the other. It's an incredibly successful and surprisingly thought-provoking piece of work. No Other Choice is an 8 out of 10. By the way, because we have publicized the Deep Dive Film Clubs, we now have memberships on this channel. That gives you access every month to the remainder of the Deep Dive Film Club episodes, rather than just the first one. All of these episodes will be available for Deep Dive members and for patrons. So if you want to support the channel and you want to support the House of Tabula in general, we want to give people multiple options for a way that they feel comfortable in supporting. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.